The day I almost didn't wear my EMT patch to my own engagement party was the day I finally understood what my father had been trying to take from me my whole life. I was standing in the bathroom of the Harrington estate, my father's idea, not mine because everything about that night was his idea, pressing a cold cloth to the back of my neck, trying to slow my heartbeat down. Through the marble walls, I could hear the string quartet he'd hired. I could hear 240 guests making small talk over champagne flutes, and I could hear his voice in my head, the one he'd been using since I was 17 years old. "You're wasting your potential. You could run this company someday. But instead, you want to play paramedic." I put the cloth down. I looked at myself in the mirror. The patch was right there on my shoulder. Riverside County Emergency Medical Services. I'd earned it at 22. I'd kept people alive with my hands in the back of moving ambulances. I'd worked double shifts on Christmas and New Year's and every holiday in between, and I had never once regretted it. I walked back out to the party. "My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and my father built a commercial real estate empire from nothing, which is something I genuinely respect. He started with one strip mall in Riverside, California when he was 26. By the time I was born, he had 4 properties. By the time I graduated high school, he had 47. Today, the number is somewhere around 200, spread across 6 states, and the name Harrington Development is on the side of office buildings in cities my grandmother never visited in her life. I tell you this because I want you to understand, my father is not a stupid man. He is not an untalented man. He built something real. He worked for it. He just decided somewhere along the way that building something real gave him the right to decide what everyone around him was worth. My mother died when I was 9. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. My father grieved in the only way he knew how, by working more, controlling more, making himself indispensable to every room he walked into. I understand that now. I didn't understand it when I was 9 or 14 or 17. What I understood then was that the house got quieter and colder, that my father looked at me sometimes like I was a problem he hadn't figured out how to solve yet, and that the only time he seemed genuinely proud of me was when I brought home straight A's or placed at a debate tournament or wore the right dress to the right event. He had a plan for me. He'd had it since before I was old enough to object. I would go to USC. I would get my MBA. I would come into the company at 25, learn every department from the inside, and take over the Western Division by the time I was 35. It was a good plan, honestly, if you were trying to build a successor. He'd even had his attorney draft a rough framework for the inheritance structure. The problem was that I didn't want it. I found out I wanted to be an EMT the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I was at a 4th of July party at a neighbor's house when a man across the yard had a heart attack. I was close. I'd had the basic first aid and CPR training my school required. I did what I'd been taught. The paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, and one of them, a woman named Sandra with a calm voice and absolutely no wasted movements, looked at me and said, "You did good, kid. You kept him here." Something in me locked into place that afternoon that has never come loose. I applied to the EMT Basic Certification Program at Riverside City College in the fall. I didn't tell my father until I was already enrolled. That conversation went about as well as you'd expect. He didn't yell. He rarely yelled, my father. He just went very quiet and very still, and then he said in a voice like a door closing, "I'll give you 1 year. Get it out of your system. Then we'll talk about what comes next." I got my certification, then my EMT intermediate, then my AMT intermediate, then my AEMT. I've been on the job for 9 years. I am not getting it out of my system. My father and I had a version of the same argument every few months for the better part of a decade. He called my career a hobby. He asked why I was wasting a brain like mine on what he called blue-collar mercy work. He told me at least 4 separate Thanksgiving dinners that he'd set aside a position for me whenever I was ready to be serious. The word serious landed every single time like a small blade, but we functioned. We maintained a relationship. I went to his company dinners when he needed me there. He came to my apartment for Christmas when I wasn't working. We were, I think, both trying to hold something together for the memory of my mother who had loved us both and would not have wanted us to become strangers. Then I met James. James Sutton came into my life the way a lot of things do in emergency medicine. suddenly and with very little warning. He was a firefighter with Riverside County Fire Station 12. We met on a call, a structure fire on Magnolia Avenue, two-story residential, family of four. We worked alongside each other for 40 minutes in the kind of focused chaos where you don't think about anything except the next thing your hands need to do. Afterward, sitting on the tailgate of my unit with our masks off and the smoke still in our hair, he said, "You're good at this." And I said, "So are you." And that was improbably the beginning. James is not from money. His father was a mechanic in Bakersfield. His mother worked the front desk of an insurance office for 30 years. He puts in 12-hour shifts and coaches a junior youth soccer league on weekends and makes the best green chile enchiladas I have ever eaten in my life. He is the steadiest person I have ever known. In a job where everything can change in the next breath, steadiness is not a small thing. He asked me to marry him on a Tuesday, not a planned dinner, not a ring in a restaurant dessert. We were on my couch in our off-duty clothes watching a documentary about national parks, and he turned down the volume and looked at me and said he wanted to spend his life with me and he didn't need anything else to know that. The ring was his grandmother's, a simple solitaire, small and real. I said yes before he finished the question. I told my father 2 days later. He was pleasant. He asked about James's family, his career, his plans. He nodded in all the right places. I thought maybe we had finally found solid ground. I should have known better. My father is an excellent negotiator. He gathers information before he acts. He insisted on hosting the engagement party. He said it was his gift to us. 240 guests, the Harrington estate in Redlands, catered dinner, a string quartet. He made it so generous that refusing would have looked ungrateful. So I said yes. James said it was up to me. He didn't trust it, but he said it was up to me. 3 days before the party, my father called me. He was very calm. He said he'd been thinking about the event, about how it would be covered. His associate's wife ran the Inland Valley Society column and would be there, about the image of the Harrington name. He said he'd like me to wear the dress he'd had sent to my apartment, the one from the boutique in Beverly Hills. He said he thought, given the venue and the guest list, I might want to leave the work things at home. I knew what the work things were. I wear a quarter zip with a department patch when I'm not in uniform. It goes with me everywhere the way his watch goes with him everywhere. I told him I'd think about it. I wore the quarter zip. The party was every bit as polished and joyless as I'd expected. James and I made our rounds. He was gracious and quiet and kept his hand at the small of my back the way he does when he knows I'm uncomfortable. His captain from Station 12 was there. James had asked if he could bring him, an older man named Walt who'd mentored him for 6 years. My father had said, of course. He'd also invited, I discovered upon arrival, a significant portion of his professional network, his attorney and 2 city council members. It was, I realized as the dinner hour started, not an engagement party. It was a business event. We were the occasion. I was standing near the edge of the terrace with James and Walt and one of James's fellow firefighters when my father materialized at my elbow with that particular quality of attention he gets when he's about to run a meeting. He looked at my shoulder. At the patch, he said loudly enough that the nearest cluster of guests could hear clear. I thought we talked about dressing appropriately for an occasion like this. This isn't a shift. The nearest cluster of guests went quiet. I said I dressed appropriately for who I am. He laughed. Not unkindly. Worse, dismissively, the way you laugh at a child who said something charmingly naive. He looked around at the people close enough to hear and said, "She's been playing paramedic for 9 years. You'd think she'd have grown out of it by now. 240 people." I felt the silence spread outward from us like something dropped in still water. James's hand found my arm. My father wasn't finished. He had the room's attention and he knew it, and I think something in him had been waiting for this moment for years. He said that he had been patient, that he had given me time to work through this phase, that there was a position waiting for me, that there had always been a position waiting for me, and that it embarrassed him. He used that word, embarrassed, to explain to his colleagues why his daughter was driving an ambulance when she could be running the Western Division of a company worth $400 million. He said, "The patch stays home from now on, Claire. I'm not asking." The silence had weight now. Physical weight. I looked at my father. I had known this man my entire life. I had watched him grieve and build and control and occasionally, in quiet moments, be something close to tender. I knew that he loved me in the only way he knew how to love anything, by trying to possess and direct it. And I had spent 31 years trying to be the daughter he could love in the way I needed to be loved. I took a breath. I said, "No." His expression shifted. That was the thing about my father. He had not heard no very many times in 20 years of business, and it still surprised him when it came from inside the house. He stepped toward me and his voice dropped, and he said something I will not repeat here because it was designed specifically to wound me in the particular way that only a parent can wound a child, and I think some things are entitled to stay private. But I will tell you that James stepped between us. Calmly, not aggressively. He just moved so that he was standing between my father and me, and he said very quietly, "That's enough, sir." My father looked at James the way men like my father look at people they've categorized as beneath them, not with anger, but with a kind of flat, dismissive evaluation. He said, "Excuse me, son, this is a family conversation." James said, "It stopped being a conversation." What happened next is something I have replayed many times. There is a man named Dr. Richard Adler. He is the chief of emergency medicine at Riverside University Health System, which is one of the largest level I trauma centers in Southern California. He has testified before the California State Legislature on emergency medical services funding. He has more commendations than I can count and a waiting room named after someone he saved. He is also, as it happened, my father's personal physician of 12 years and one of the 240 guests standing in that terrace. He had been about 15 feet away when my father started speaking. He set down his champagne glass. He walked over. He stood next to James, and he looked at my father, and in a voice that was not loud, that was in fact completely level. The voice of a man who has delivered terrible news to families in waiting rooms and has learned that volume is not the same as authority. He said, "This woman has saved lives I couldn't get to in time." 7 words. That was it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't elaborate. He let those words exist in that silence the way a diagnosis exists in a room, as something that cannot be taken back. My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Dr. Adler looked at me. He said, "The patch looks good on you, Claire. Don't ever take it off." Then he picked his champagne back up and walked away. I have thought a lot about what happened in the weeks after that night. My father did not speak to me for 11 days. On the 12th day, he called and said he wanted to have lunch. We met at a diner near my station. I chose it, not him, and I want to note that he came without complaint. He ordered coffee and looked at the table for a long time, and then he said something I had waited 31 years to hear. He said, "I don't know how to be proud of something I don't understand." It wasn't an apology exactly. My father is not a man built for exact apologies. But it was true, and it cost him something to say it, and I chose to receive it in the spirit it was offered. I told him that I had saved 63 people. That was the number I had from my incident reports. 63 documented cases where my intervention was listed as a contributing factor in a positive outcome. I told him that I woke up every morning knowing exactly why I was getting out of bed. I told him that James was the best person I had ever met, that he worked a job that ate at him, and he did it anyway because he believed in it, and that this was exactly the kind of person I wanted to build a life with. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother would have liked him." That was the moment, not the party, not Dr. Adler's 7 words, not James stepping in front of me. It was this. My father at a diner booth, drinking bad coffee, paying his daughter the highest compliment he knew how to pay. I drove back to the station afterward, and I sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes before I went inside. James texted to ask how it went. I typed back, "I think we're going to be okay." Then I sent 3 more words, "I love you." He replied in about 4 seconds, "I love you too." "Enchiladas tonight?" I laughed out loud in an empty parking lot. My father came to our wedding 6 months later. He walked me down the aisle. I asked him to, and it mattered to me that I asked him because I wanted to, not because I owed him anything. He wore his best suit and he did not cry, which is very on brand for him, but his voice wobbled for exactly 1 second when he gave the brief toast at the reception and said my mother's name. He shook James's hand with both hands. That is the highest physical expression of respect my father is capable of, and James received it with the easy dignity that is just his natural state of being. Dr. Adler sent a gift. A framed print of a Riverside County EMS patch, signed on the back, "The patch always stays on. RAR. I have it on the wall of our bedroom. Ward from Station 12 gave a toast that lasted 4 minutes and made everyone in the room cry, including two of my father's business partners who had definitely not planned on crying at anything that evening. I wore my dress and I did not wear the quarter zip because it was my wedding and I got to make that choice freely, which is the entire point. I still drive an ambulance. I'm studying now for my paramedic certification, which will take another 18 months and is the hardest thing I have done since the original program. James still runs into burning buildings and coaches soccer on weekends. We have a house in Riverside, a rescue dog named Biscuit, and a standing disagreement about whether breakfast burritos are acceptable dinner food. They are. I am right about this. My father and I have dinner once a month. He has come to accept, I think, that the position in the Western Division will need someone other than me. He asks about my calls sometimes, carefully, in the way someone asks about a subject they are just learning the vocabulary for. Last month, I told him about a pediatric call, a child who had stopped breathing, whom we brought back, and he listened without saying anything, and at the end he just said, "Good," one syllable, but he meant it. I don't need him to understand everything I do. I don't need him to have always been right. I don't need the version of my life he planned for me. What I needed was for him to see me, actually see me, not the company asset, not the investment in a succession plan, and in that diner over bad coffee, I think he finally did. Some legacies you build yourself. My mother used to say that the people who love you best are the ones who make you more yourself, not less. I was 9 when she said it, and I didn't know what it meant yet. I know now. I know it every morning when I clip on my badge and James kisses me on his way out the door and Biscuit tries to eat my boots. I know it when I get in the ambulance and the radio crackles and there's somewhere I need to be. The patch stays on. It always stays on. I've thought about that terrace a lot since that night. Not the part where my father called my career an embarrassment in front of 240 people, though I've thought about that too. But the part right after. The silence. The way it spread. The way 240 people in cocktail attire suddenly had nowhere to look. My father built everything he has by understanding leverage. He knows when a room is with him and when it isn't. And in that moment, standing there with his champagne and his certainty, he felt the room go somewhere he hadn't anticipated. I watched it happen on his face. That is its own kind of consequence, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that makes for a satisfying ending in a story, but the quiet kind that a person carries home with them and has to sit with alone. What I keep coming back to is this. He didn't create that moment by being cruel. He created it by spending years believing that his version of success was the only version that counted. Every time he called my work a phase, every time he set aside that position in the Western Division like a place I'd eventually come back to, he was making a small investment in that night on the terrace. The bill came due in public, which is the only way my father has ever been willing to receive difficult information. And here's the thing about Dr. Adler. He didn't do what he did because he was trying to defend me. He did it because it was simply true. Because he had watched people like me keep people like his patients alive in the minutes before they reached him, and he had the clarity to say so without dressing it up. Integrity at that level doesn't calculate. It just moves. That is what it looks like when someone has spent decades building a self that doesn't need to perform. He put down his glass and walked over and told the truth and walked away. 7 words. No follow-up required. James, I already knew, but watching him step in front of me without raising his voice, without a single wasted word, that reminded me why I said yes before he finished asking. Steadiness is not a passive quality. It is something a person builds, shift by shift, call by call, choice by choice. He built it the same way I built mine, the same way anyone builds anything worth having. I am not the same person I was at 17, sitting in my father's study while he explained my future to me. I became someone else in the back of ambulances, in hospital corridors, in parking lots at 3 in the morning, after calls that took something out of me. That becoming was not comfortable. It was not always supported. But it was mine, completely mine, and no title on the company org chart could have given me that. My father is learning. Slowly, in the way that people learn when they are proud and late and doing their best anyway. I am choosing to meet him there. Not because he deserves it automatically, but because I understand now that carrying resentment would cost me more than it would cost him, and I am too busy for that. I have a paramedic certification to finish. I have a husband who makes extraordinary enchiladas. I have a dog who is unreasonably committed to eating my boots. The patch stays on, it always stays on, and I think, finally, my father is beginning to understand why.